परमे सत्यं ज्ञानं सत्यं ज्ञानं ज्योतिररविन्द सत्यं ज्ञानं सत्यं ज्ञानं ज्योतिररविन्द सत्यं ज्ञानं सत्यं ज्ञानं ज्योतिररविन्द ज्योतिररविन्द ज्योतिररविन्द. So the topic of our talk today is dealing with human imperfection. So how many of us here find that difficult to deal with human imperfection? How many of us? All of us, right? What is it about human imperfection that really troubles us? What I mean by human imperfection, I see a person who doesn't behave the way in my mind it's supposed to be. Why does it bother me so much? Because I have an expectation, right? I have an expectation that the person should behave a certain way. And I have that expectation because the person is very real for me, right? Like I am convinced that this person who's saying mean things to me maybe has a particular free will of his own, is using that free will to purposely harm me, etc. So if I am sitting and there's a dog next to me and somebody throws a stone at the dog and the dog starts barking at me, if I didn't see that the dog was hit by a stone, I will think the dog is angry at me. I will think that the dog has some angst against me. But I have missed the fact that the dog was conditioned to bark because of the stone that hit him. Now, every human being who upsets me is like that dog who's barking because there's an invisible stone that has hit the dog. And what is that invisible stone? The person's past conditioning, right? Every person is a product of their conditioning. So, we don't know in what way the conditioning is the stone hitting the person at that moment when they behave like that to us, right? And then if in a way, every human interaction with us, am I loud enough? Every human interaction with us is really an interaction with a conditioned pattern, because there are very few human beings who are conscious enough who don't act out of conditioning. Most of our reactions, they are coming from our past conditioning, right? So I'll quickly recap the story of the empty boat. There was once a monk who was meditating in a boat because he loved that, and another boat kept coming and hitting his boat, and he bore it till at one point he turned around and yelled, "Can't you see I'm trying to meditate? Why do you keep annoying me?" And then he saw there was nobody in the boat. The boat had just lost its anchor, and it was the water and the wind which was moving the boat to hit against his boat. So every person who annoys me in that sense is an empty boat, where in the metaphor, the water and wind which is making the boat hit me is the past conditioning of that person. So very few of us are conscious enough to be bigger than our nature, are we? Think about it. There are so many times you get triggered and you know you don't want to get triggered, but the winds and waters of your nature are too strong. They push you to say things and so if that's the case with me, that's the case with the person who's triggering me also, right? He's not conscious enough to be bigger than his nature. He's not conscious enough to not bark when that stone hits him. So how can I really blame that person? Our problem is we are blaming people because they are very real in our mind, right? So another metaphor, for example, if I am a child who's getting hassled by the curtain fluttering and thinking there's a ghost there, the more I'm convinced there's a ghost, the more I'll react. But if I come and see that, oh, there's a wind coming from there which is making the curtain flutter, then I won't, the ghost dissolves for me, right? So every person is actually not there. It's just a conditioning, it's just a movement of nature. But we take that person so seriously that we get triggered by the person. Any questions? Okay, so in order to not get triggered by human beings, we need to understand little bit, even intellectually, what a human being is. Just the way you need to intellectually understand the mechanism of the fluttering of the curtain, right? So these are beautiful words from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri describing the human condition. A voyager, a traveler twixt thoughts in constant shores. So we are constantly traveling through thoughts in constant shores. Today a thought is telling me this, tomorrow the thought is telling me something else. So you also get zapped at yourself, no? Today you will express one opinion about yourself or something. Tomorrow you will express an opposite opinion and both seem real to you. So thoughts in constant shores. A hunter of unknown and beautiful powers, a nomad of the far mysterious light. So a nomad is a wanderer. We are wandering to seek the far mysterious light. In the wide ways, a little spark of God. Against his spirit, all is in dire league. Whatever his spirit wants, everything in the world is opposing it. All is in dire league. A titan influence, an influence of the asuras, stops his Godward gaze. Around him hungers the unpitying void. The eternal darkness seeks him with her hands, darkness of ignorance. So the eternal darkness of ignorance is constantly seeking to pull us into it. Inscrutable energies drive him and deceive. Immense, implacable deities oppose. An inert soul, so all of us have a soul, but it's not really awake enough to exert itself. And a somnambulist is half sleeping force, so that's Prakriti. An inert soul and a somnambulist force have made a world estranged from life and thought. The dragon of the dark foundations keeps unalterable the law of chance and death. On his long way through time and circumstance, the grey-hued riddling nether shadow sphinx, her dreadful paws upon the swallowing sands, awaits him armed with the soul-slaying word. Across his path sits the dim camp of night. His day is a moment in perpetual time. He is the prey of the minutes and the hours. Assailed on earth and unassured of heaven. What a beautiful line. This describes all our condition. We feel attacked on earth, attacked by different circumstances, and unassured of heaven. Somewhere we are not sure that there is that heaven which will deliver us. So assailed on earth, unassured of heaven. Descended here, unhappy and sublime. A link between the demigod and the beast. He knows not his own greatness nor his aim. He has forgotten why he has come and whence. His spirit and members are at war. Members are mind, body and emotions. So very often what we want with our mind, body and emotion is against what our spirit wants. His heights break off too low to reach the skies. His mass is buried in the animal mire. A strange antimony is his nature's rule. A riddle of opposites is made his field. Freedom he asks, but needs to live in bonds. We feel uncomfortable if we don't live in the bondage of our comfort zones, right? We want freedom, but we are unwilling to give away our prison. He has need of darkness to perceive some light, and need of grief to feel a little bliss. He has need of death to find a greater life. All sides he sees and turns to every call. He has no certain light by which to walk. Today somebody gave me this opinion, I'll go there. Tomorrow somebody else gave me the opposite opinion, I'll go there. When I'm living with my thoughts, I have no certain light by which to walk. His life is a blind man's buff, a hide and seek. He seeks himself, and from himself he runs. Meeting himself, he thinks it other than he. Always he builds, but finds no constant ground. Always he journeys, but nowhere arrives. He would guide the world. Himself he cannot guide. He would save his soul. His life he cannot save. The light his soul has brought, his mind has lost. All he has learned is soon again in doubt. A sun to him seems the shadow of his thoughts. He believes his thoughts are ultimate. They are the sun. They are illuminating. He doesn't doubt the judgments his thoughts creates. So when he thinks that dog is horrible and is going to attack me, that's the sun for him. He's not thinking beyond that. He's taking his thoughts as ultimate. Then all is shadow again and nothing true. Unknowing what he does or whither he tends, he fabricates signs of the real in ignorance. He has hitched his mortal error to truth's star. Wisdom attracts him with her luminous masks, but never has he seen the face behind. A giant ignorance surrounds his lore, a sign to meet the cosmic mystery. In the dumb figure of a material world, his passport of entry and his personage, he is compelled to be what he is not. He obeys the inconscience he has come to rule and sinks in matter to fulfill his soul. So the whole point of this passage is to tell us what a plaything each human being is in the hands of forces of life. So if each human being is so pulled by the forces of nature and life, how can we really hold him responsible for his behavior? We have very little free will. Look at yourself. How much free will do you really have in the face of your triggers? Unless you've really worked on yourself, you have very little free will. So why blame another person when they don't seem to have control over their nature and behave in words that are offensive? It's just the empty boat played by nature hitting against you. Allow it to be. Don't take it personally. Don't think the dog is barking at me. There'll always be some invisible stone of conditioning that's hitting the dog to bark at you. So, Toll's words, every human being has been conditioned to think and behave in certain ways. Conditioned genetically. Sometimes we are born with, somewhere are born with the behavior patterns of our parents or ancestors, right? As well as by their childhood experiences and their cultural environment. That is not who they are. That is who they appear to be. So beautiful. The dog barking is not the truth of the dog. It's just a conditioned pattern. Behind that, everyone is God, right? Everyone is the mother. That is not who they are, but that is who they appear to be. When you pronounce judgment upon someone, you confuse those conditioned mind patterns with who they are. To do that is in itself a deeply conditioned and unconscious pattern. You give them a conceptual identity, and that false identity becomes a prison, not only for the other person but also for yourself. So beautiful and so true. So if I have made an identity of a person, I have an already always about that person. When I go to that person, I'm expecting the person is already like that and always like that. And that already always I hold about the person becomes a prison for me also. No, I can't be free around that person. I'm always on my guard. I'm always expecting that behavior. And because I'm expecting that behavior, I'll draw it out also from that person. But if I see that human imperfection and I just say that's not who the person really is, that's just the conditioning of the person playing out. Behind that, that person, like every other person, is just the same God essence, right? So to remember that all the time, then you don't take the behavior of that person very seriously. Not seriously enough to make it personal, to get offended, to start hating on that person, disliking the person. Any questions? Anything to say? Okay, so we continue. To let go of judgment does not mean that you don't see what they do. It means that you recognize their behavior as a form of conditioning and you see it and accept it as that. You don't construct an identity out of it for that person. You don't say that's a mean person, that's a selfish person, that's a this person, that's a that person. It's just a conditioned thought pattern. That liberates you as well as the other person from identification with conditioning, with form, with mind. The ego then no longer runs your relationships. See, so I'll try and share a little bit of what we did in the yoga class this morning, because I really believe what Mother says, that you can live a truth only when you live it with the body, isn't it? So whenever a person rubs you off the wrong way, you resist that behavior, right? You make it personal. When you resist that behavior, you harden, right? Wherever you harden, the ego gets very strong, because the only thing in you that can ever hurt is the ego. Nothing else in you can hurt. Only your ego can hurt, right? What you are beyond the ego, it can't be hurt. So whatever is hurt, wherever the ego is very strong, there's a need to assert. There's a need to see what is ego. In simple terms, it's the need to be noticed. It's the need to be acknowledged. It's the need to be seen, right? Now, when you're stretching in an asana, wherever there's pain, that muscle will tighten. Obviously it will, or it will stretch. When it stretches, the muscle will push against the skin, push forward against the skin, right? See, even if you're not part of a yoga class, you can do a simple stretch and experience it. The muscle will push against the skin. Now, in a way, that's the physical ego. Whatever is hurt wants to push itself forward, wants to be acknowledged, wants to prove it's right. Now, at that time, if you learn to move the muscle away from the skin, not forward push. Ego is what wants to push forward. Whenever you soften and the ego withdraws, the self comes forward, the real self. And whenever the ego comes forward, the self withdraws. So in a simple asana practice, if you learn to soften a muscle behind the skin, it's withdrawing the physical ego of that part. And then the same asana is not hurting you anymore. The same thing is not painful anymore. So if you can do it with your body, as Mother says, a truth can only be lived when you live it with your body. So if you learn to soften the muscle away, similarly then in life you'll be able to do that. When you're hurt, the ego wants to come forward and hit out, and at some level maybe that's necessary. When you're younger, you need to individualize, but as Sri Aurobindo says, ego was the helper, ego is the bar. At some point you need to act from a space beyond the ego. And that's why when you get triggered, if you just soften instead of pushing forward and fighting, if you soften behind it, if you let go of resistance. How will you let go of resistance? By all this that we've discussed, that it's just a conditioned thought pattern, there's nothing personal there. It's an empty boat hitting against me. To yell at it is to yell at the empty boat. It's quite pointless. And then after softening, when you're quiet, when you're gathered, then if you need to take the right action, you'll take it. For example, I want to meditate. I don't want to be a doormat where the boat keeps hitting against my boat. But instead of yelling at somebody, I'll just do something to push the boat away from me and put an anchor down. So it doesn't mean you don't take action, but usually when you're angry and you hit out, you don't take the right action. So when you're individualizing, when you're coming into your own, it's nice to find your voice. But remember, that's the voice of the ego. There's another voice, a higher voice that needs to be found, which you'll find when you transcend the voice of the ego. Am I making sense? Are we together so far? So when you receive whoever comes into the space of now as a noble guest, when you allow each person to be as they are, they begin to change. So beautiful. When you receive whoever comes into the space of now as a noble guest, when you allow each person to be as they are, they begin to change. So if I have understood that all human beings are imperfect, firstly understand that. Don't expect perfection out of imperfect molds. And that's what Mother says. I mean, I keep repeating this sentence because there are some sentences of hers which have been game changers in my life. One sentence she's written is, every human being will let you down. Don't be surprised when they do. They are imperfect. Don't expect perfection from imperfect molds. So she says no human being is really going to be there for you. Only the divine is for you if you are for the divine. And what does it mean for the divine to see that everything is the divine masquerading as separate human beings? So I can't expect perfection out of a masquerade, right? The real person behind the mask, I can expect perfection out of that because that's something existent. But the mask is just something that's been painted by the forces of nature, and it will change moment to moment. So how can I expect perfection out of it? So once you fully understood that human beings are going to be imperfect, but with all their imperfections, let me love them anyways, and let me allow them their imperfect changing nature. So once I stop putting an impossible demand on something imperfect to yield perfection, I'm at peace. I'm not disappointed. When they don't fulfill my expectations, it's okay. That's their nature. That's how they are being pulled by the forces of nature. But the beautiful thing is, it's not that we have to settle for disappointment in human nature. We have to remember that this imperfect, changing human nature is being used from behind by an all-perfect, all-knowing intelligence to give us exactly the experiences we need. So that's where surrender can come in. I'm not judging the frontal person, and I'm in surrender to the essence that is manipulating the person to be what he or she is. Remember, I keep saying conflict is good because conflict brings out in my nature things that I need to see. Otherwise, I would never know they exist and they could never change. And every time I come across something that I can't control, it's teaching me the beautiful life skill of letting go, right? If I could control everything, I'd never learn to let go. So every time I'm faced with uncontrollables, I can't control the way this person behaves with me. Why do you behave like this? I want you to change. But when I can't control it, I'm forced to let go of my demand on that person that you should change to make me happy. And then that's what Toll is saying here. He's saying something very beautiful. When you receive whoever comes into the space of now as a noble guest, when you allow each person to be as they are, they begin to change. And when you're not controlled, see, if they behave in a certain way and you start building a narrative about it and you're controlled by that narrative, you're also an empty boat, right? You'll go and knock against 10 empty boats and disturb their peace. But if you are just patient with that narrative, if you just say, this is what my mind is saying, but let me wait. Many times in the past, I've had interactions with people, my mind has created a story, but it's not been true. Let me not be controlled by this narrative. So this morning, one of my yoga students shared a beautiful line. She said that when she was very upset, her friend gave her this advice that whenever you're facing darkness, sit with it long enough till you see the stars in it. So beautiful, no? Don't let the darkness control you. Sit with it long enough till you start seeing the stars in the darkness. Because every darkness, Sri Aurobindo says, no, there's nothing like darkness. All darkness is actually full of invisible light, light which you can't see. You can't see the purpose of that interaction because you're blinded by your own ignorance. But if you sit still and let your ignorance settle down, you'll see different perspectives. You'll understand why that darkness is there. And that understanding is the stars in the darkness. So this is a beautiful interaction that Karen Miller's master Mezumi Roshi had with his followers. A group of practitioners had asked Mezumi was the master, the Zen master, to convene a meeting because some of them weren't getting along. They were bothered by the way things were going. Other people were taking liberties, exploiting their status, not doing their share. So it was the usual politics among disciples. They were unhappy with each other and they are going to the master for a solution. It wasn't right, it was unfair. They wanted Mejumi to hear them out so he could intervene and discipline the offenders. It always helps, they said, to bring an upset out into the open so that something can be done. And that's the way, I mean, it's not wrong. We always feel, no, if I'm upset, I have to find my voice. I have to speak up for myself. And that's right in a certain dimension, and that's what happens. So they all brought it up to their master, and they all, in front of each other, voiced, you're wrong, I'm wrong, whatever. I was a visitor. Karen Miller was the visitor. So I said nothing. My practice was hard enough to maintain just by myself. No one else was making it harder. So as an impartial, so she wasn't really an inmate of that monastery. She was a visitor, so she was just watching. But as an impartial observer, I could see where the problem originated. Everyone said his or her piece. Arrows flew through the room. Mejumi heard it all and seemed genuinely bewildered. The Zen master saying, what is this world? It's alien to me. What are they talking about? Because he lived in another way. He was quiet for a long time. We come together to practice like trees in a forest, he said. No tree bothers any other. Every tree shares the same ground, light, water, food and space. Each grows according to its own capacity and the conditions present. Trees grow upright and strong and together create a place of shelter and beauty. Where exactly is the problem? So imagine you're going to the master for a solution and he's telling you this. So everyone was very disgruntled. So human relationships are not that simple, someone countered, exasperated at the old man's cultural blindness. These days, people require a more sophisticated approach, taking into account personal histories, biases and feeling. Don't you think, he asked, don't give me this simple answer about trees and all. We are not trees, we have minds, we think, you have to take each of us into account. And he said, don't you think that's so? So the master answered, don't think. Many left the room unsatisfied. So it's so beautiful. It's like they are talking two different languages. The students are coming to the master with, he said this, she said this, you solve it. But the master is saying that, why are you first of all going into all that? This whole world is functioning out of natural intelligence. Look at the trees, they share the same ground. They share the same water resources, light resources, air resources. Most problems are, you feel you took more, I got less, that kind of thing. And they manage and they live in harmony because they don't think. They are just harmonizing into each other. So that's what the master was saying, that don't believe your thoughts, which is so expert at creating conflict. Just be in flow with the harmony of life. Does this make sense? Don't think, he said. Many left the room unsatisfied. As for the teacher, he looked tired. How do I explain this? As we practice together sincerely, we become increasingly aware that internal and external cannot be separated. This is the growing awareness of the real harmony that underlines everything. That's what Mejumi tried to bring to life in his teaching. Some folks will fight harmony to death. Some folks will fight harmony to death. Now Sri Mother's words, okay, Mother says, Sri Aurobindo repeatedly said, be simple, be simple. And when he said those words, it was like a path of light opening up. Very simple. Oh, but one has only to put one foot in front of the another. It's strange. It was as if all complications come from here. Mother touches her temples. This is Mother speaking. It was very complicated and very difficult to adjust. And then when he said, be simple, a light came from the eyes like this, as if one suddenly emerged into a garden of light. And when I hear him or see him, it's like a glittering cascade of golden light, like a fragrant garden. Everything, but everything is open. Be simple. And I know what he means. Not to let in that thought which controls, organizes, orders and judges. He does not want that. Same thing what Mezumi Roshi was saying. No, don't think. What he calls simple is joyful spontaneity in action, in expression, in movement, in life. It means to rediscover in evolution that kind of condition he called divine, which was spontaneous and happy condition. The same condition which Mezumi Roshi is saying, that's the condition of the trees and everything in nature, right? It's simple. It's happy with what comes to it because it's not judging it with thoughts and stories and narratives. So that's what Sri Aurobindo said, be simple. Our thoughts complicate things too much. Our thoughts impute intentions to people which may not be there. It's just very complicated. So Sri Aurobindo is saying be simple means simplify your thought process. Don't complicate it by building so many stories and judgments about it. So now this is Mother's words again from Mind of Cells. It's beginning to obey another law, Mother says. For example, knowing just at each minute what has to be done, what has to be said, what's going to happen. If there is the slightest attention or concentration in order to find out, she means through thought, it doesn't happen. If you are like that, simply in that kind of inner immobility, then for all the small details of life, just at the necessary moment, you know, what you have to say comes. What you have to reply is there. The person who comes in comes in. It's a sort of automatic action. In the mental world, you think the thing before doing it. Here, in the world she was living in, she was exploring the supramental world. It's not like that. For example, if I'm not meant to say something, instead of going through the thought, I mustn't speak, I just can't speak anymore. That's what spontaneous living is. It doesn't go through thought. Thought is silenced and another consciousness is spontaneously doing what you need to do. All sorts of things are like that. The functioning is direct. We always come back to this. Being is the only thing that has power. Such a powerful sentence. Being is the only thing that has power. We think thinking has power, but thinking often makes us so powerless, no? Because we complicate the simplest things in life when we think about it. For instance, Mother continues, I'll pick up a piece of paper. I'll see as clearly as I did before. Then comes the old habit or the idea or memory that I need a magnifying glass to see. I can't see anymore. So before, her thought reminded her that she needed a magnifying glass because she was aging. Before, her thought reminded her that she needed a magnifying glass, she could see perfectly. But the moment the thought comes that, oh, you need a magnifying glass, the whole thing becomes hazy. Then I forget about seeing or not seeing and I can do my work very well. I don't notice that I see or don't see, and it's like that with everything. Once again, we are struck by this kind of memory or remembrance which makes one blind, ill or dying. And then the memory goes away and the thing no longer exists. So she's saying, If I keep remembering about an illness, I manifest it in my body. If I reach a point where I just stop thinking about it, natural intelligence works on it and it goes away. You can see very well, you no longer have cancer and you're not dying in the least. The next species is the one that will lose the memory of death. And mother adds, it's apparent incoherence. It must depend on another law which for the moment I don't know, but which rules the physical. So then our conditioning tells us that we have to look after our health, right? For that we have to keep going for medical checkups, we have to keep doing this. But sometimes the healthiest people I know are people who've never gone for a single medical checkup. But that doesn't mean you have to be careless. Don't listen to your mind. Your mind will always lie. But listen to your body never lies. So if your body feels a certain sense of unease or discomfort, by all means do what you can to heal it. But don't project illness onto the body by thinking, oh my God, because of this I'll have this, because of this I'll have that, because then you'll actually create illness in the body. The less you think about illness, the less it manifests in your body. Like the moment mother thought of that her eyes can't see, she needed the magnifying lens. When her mind completely lost all memory of that lack of vision, she had vision. Now, these are Sri Aurobindo's words. This then is the first necessity, that the individual, each individual shall discover the spirit, the divine reality within him, and express that in all his being and living. Earlier, mother says the most powerful thing is being, just being who you are in your truth. This then is the first necessity, that the individual, each individual shall discover the spirit, the divine reality within him, and express that in all his being and living. A divine life must be first and foremost an inner life, for since the outward must be the expression of what is within, there can be no divinity in the outer existence if there is not the divinization of the inner being. The divinity in man dwells veiled in his spiritual center. There can be no such thing as self-exceeding for man or a higher issue for his existence if there is not in him the reality of an eternal self and spirit. To be and to be fully is nature's aim in us, not to think and think fully, to be and be fully. But to be fully is to be wholly conscious of one's being. Unconsciousness, half consciousness, or deficient consciousness is a state of being not in possession of itself. So, Eckhart Tolle gives this beautiful example of a beggar who's sitting on a box and he's begging everyone for change. So a traveler who's a wise man passes and tells him that, what are you sitting on? So he said, just an old box. So the traveler said, ever looked inside? And the beggar says, no, it's just an old box. Please give me some money so I can eat my meal. So that traveler says, please open the box. And he opens the box and he finds it full of gold coins. So this metaphor is for each of us. Each of us thinks we are a beggar, but actually we have so much spiritual wealth inside us, so much wealth in our being which needs to be tapped. But because we have it, but we don't possess it, right? If we are not conscious of it, we don't possess it. So in Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo beautifully says, possess what you contain. Each of us contains that, but we don't possess it because we are not conscious of it. So that is, I mean, we are looking for scraps of happiness and gold outside. We are begging life to give us that happiness. But each of us is sitting on a treasure trove of gold, but we don't have access to it. We don't possess it because we don't know where it is, though we are sitting right on top of it. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is saying. To be aware wholly and integrally of oneself and all the truth of one's being is the first necessary condition of true possession of existence. Let me possess what I contain. But also, since the consciousness carries in itself the force of existence, to be fully is to have the intrinsic and integral force of one's being. It is to come into possession of all one's force of self and of all its use. To be merely without possessing the force of one's being, or with a half force or a deficient force of it, is a mutilated or diminished existence. It is to exist, but it is not fullness of being. Which is why it's so necessary on a daily basis to spend some time discovering what's inside us. To just fritter away all our energy in trying to survive, it's such a waste, because if you just sit with yourself and make some inroads into the treasure within, how much easier your outer life becomes, right? Because you're getting a leverage. A lever is a machine which makes a difficult task easy. So life is not easy for us. But if we find that leverage inside us in our being, anything difficult becomes so easy. But somehow we get hypnotized, we get carried away, we hardly spend any time discovering the gold we are sitting on. Lastly, to be fully is to have the full delight of being. Being without delight of being, without an entire delight of itself and all things, is something neutral or diminished. It is existence, but it is not fullness of being. This delight too must be intrinsic, self-existent, automatic. It cannot be dependent on things outside itself. Whatever it delights in, it makes part of itself, has the joy of it as part of its universality. All undelight, all pain and suffering are a sign of imperfection, of incompleteness. They arise from a division of being, an incompleteness of consciousness of being, an incompleteness of the force of being. To become complete in being, in consciousness of being, in force of being, in the delight of being, and to live in this integrated completeness is the divine living. Sri Aurobindo then says beautifully in Thoughts and Glimpses, when we have passed beyond enjoyings, then we shall have bliss. Desire was the helper, desire is the bar. When we are incomplete human beings, we have objects of desire to reach out for. And when that object of desire is gained, we have a moment of happiness. And that at least gives us some respite from the constant undertone of unhappiness we live with. So, when we are spiritual infants, desire is the helper. It at least helps us to live and snatch some moments of pleasure from life. But as we grow spiritually, desire becomes the bar. Because Mother says it very beautifully that the vibration of ananda and pleasure cannot coexist. When you fulfill a desire, you get pleasure, momentary pleasure. But Ananda comes from your being. Ananda is part of the gold treasure trove you're sitting on. So every time a desire is fulfilled, the ego is happy. The ego comes forward. Remember, whenever your ego comes forward, your self will retreat. The self with a capital S. And whenever the self comes forward, necessarily the ego retreats. Whenever the self comes forward, there's a natural feeling of joy and ananda, which has nothing to do with satisfying or fulfilling desires. So spiritual maturity comes in moving the axis of your happiness from pleasure of fulfilling desires to ananda of your essential self. So Sri Aurobindo's words from Synthesis of Yoga: a really perfect enjoyment of existence can only come when what we enjoy is not the world in itself or for itself, but God in the world. When it is not things, but the ananda of the spirit in things that forms the real, essential object of our enjoying, and things only as a form and symbol of the spirit, waves of the ocean of ananda. So he's saying a very beautiful thing. The real perfect enjoyment of existence comes not when we enjoy objects for themselves, but when we enjoy the God essence in them. Now, how do we do that? We do that when the God essence in things becomes visible to us. Now, when we are in nature, this happens very naturally, right? Because the God essence in a flower or a leaf is much more visible even to a very clouded consciousness than the God essence in this wood or in my spectacles, for instance. But when I'm in nature, what I'm really enjoying is not just the leaves and the trees and the flowers, but the essence that's emanating through them, isn't it? That's why our sages love to meditate in forests, because it was so easy to connect to God in nature, isn't it? Now, a more enlightened consciousness slowly starts feeling this God essence in everything. So wherever such an enlightened consciousness goes, it feels the presence of God in that object and it enjoys that. Vedanta calls it the rasanubhuti, the juice of God essence in each thing which is being enjoyed. So Sadhguru shares a very beautiful story about his grandmother. He had a very different and strange grandmother. She said she never did worship in a usual way. She loved God to death, but she would often get flowers and playfully with her feet kick the flowers onto the idol. Nothing was blasphemous for her. It was her way of worshipping. And she would, out of her food, large portion of it she would put on the window for the crows, for the ants on the ground. And she would say when the ants would come and eat the food, she would be crying in ecstasy. Because to her vision, the ants were also God, and it gave her so much joy to see the ants coming and eating the food. So it's about developing that vision where we just see God and feel God everywhere. How do we start with this? Well, it can start with our mind. The Gita says, no, yoya shraddha sa eva sa. Whatever is your faith will become your truth. So to constantly remember that this floor is also God, the cushion is God, this person is God, and to constantly remember that. And if you have enough love for God, just to remember that prarthana, that mother is in prarthana, that's not prarthana sitting there, that's sakshatkar mother. Looking at prarthana, I can feel joy if I love mother enough, isn't it? So it has to be something living. Then if everything is the field of God for me, then I'm happy wherever I am. And that's what we see in Sri Aurobindo's life, right? He was under the worst circumstances in jail, but the most joyful time in his life till that moment. Of course, later on in his sadhana, who knows what he experienced, none of us can comment on it. But till that moment in jail, the most joyful time was in jail, when his inner vision opened up and he just saw Krishna in everything. So that's when he experienced Ananda, and that Ananda was so big that though none of his physical requirements were fulfilled in jail, he was just unconditionally happy. So, further the mother says, the world is not an unfortunate accident. It is a marvel which moves towards its expression. The world needs the certitude of the beauty of the future, and Sri Aurobindo has given that assurance. So the world is not an unfortunate accident. Very often when we feel my life is unfortunate, I feel it's an unfortunate accident. Life is random. So suppose randomly this goes wrong or that goes wrong. But so beautifully he writes in Savitri, right? This world is not built of random bricks of chance. A blind God is not destiny's architect. A conscious power has drawn the plan of life. There is a meaning in each curve and line. So this world is not an unfortunate accident. It is a marvel which moves towards its expression. The world needs the certitude of beauty for the future. So right now I'm looking at ugliness and I need an assurance that this ugliness is work in progress towards a future beauty. And Mother says Sri Aurobindo has given that assurance. He has given the assurance. In Savitri he writes, all this will happen and justify the light on nature's face. Right now everything's so dark that we feel nature's face doesn't deserve light, or it will never have light. But he says justify the light on nature's face. The world needs the certitude of beauty of the future, and Sri Aurobindo has given that assurance, that everything that's ugly right now is only work in progress towards an eternal beauty which is to come. The world is perpetually changing, perpetually. Not for a second is it like itself, and the general harmony expresses itself more and more perfectly. Therefore, nothing can remain as it is, and in spite of all appearances to the contrary, the whole is always constantly progressing. Mother is saying that the world is constantly changing. That's the Buddhist anicca, constant change. Not for a second is it like itself. Therefore, we say we never step into the same river twice, right? By the time you step in again, fresh waters have flown. And the general harmony expresses itself more and more perfectly. So, individually there may be disharmony on the way, but the general harmony of the whole is expressing itself more and more perfectly. But we don't have the vision to see that general harmony of the whole. We stop short at the piecemeal disharmony between me and that person and whatever. But the Mother is assuring us that the world is progressing towards a harmony. Whatever is happening is moving towards a holistic harmony which is not visible to our seeing. Therefore, nothing can remain as it is, and in spite of all appearances to the contrary, the whole is always constantly progressing. The harmony is becoming more and more harmonious, the truth becoming more and more true in the manifestation. But to see that, one must see the whole. and man sees only not even the domain, but only his personal domain, quite small, microscopic. He cannot understand. Yeah? So mother's constantly reminding us that don't look at the little piece that's visible to you and judge the whole as bad. The whole is always beautiful. It's always the field of Bhadram. But because you are seeing only a piece of it, it's not making sense to you and you're calling it bad, right? So the last thing in your PDF is this beautiful mantra from the Rig Veda, which we explored in our yoga class, which my yoga teacher taught me. So it says, Ano Bhadra. Ano is come. Bhadra is auspicious. Kritvo is thoughts or actions. Yantu, come to me. Vishwata, from all sides of the universe. So may noble thoughts come to me from all sides. When will noble thoughts come to me from all sides? What is noble? What does noble mean? Auspicious in one sense, good. So when will, see, where my thoughts come from my perception, right? I perceive something and I build a thought about it. So when my perception changes to constantly remember what mother just said, that as a whole there's always beauty. But if you see only a piece, you'll see ugliness. So if I see ugliness in what I'm perceiving and I drop it and I say that I'm seeing it as ugly, but actually it has to be beautiful when seen through the perspective of the whole. That every moment, if Sri Aurobindo is assuring me there's a meaning in every curve and line, that nothing in this universe is random, that everything is coming to me for a purpose. I'm not seeing that purpose, so I'm perceiving it as abhadra. But can I make a leap of faith to recognize that it has to be good, it has to be bhadram if it's come, because at every moment the all perfect is designing the moment. And an all perfect intelligence cannot design an imperfect moment, right? The imperfection has to be in my seeing. It's not in the moment. Are we clear? So the mantra is Ano, you can look at it in your PDF. Ano Bhadra. Repeat it. Ano Bhadra. Kritavo Yantu. Vishwata. Again, Ano Bhadra. Kritavo Yantu. Vishwata. Now shut your eyes. If you need to open to look at the mantra, feel free, but if you kind of know it, then shut your eyes. So, feel the front of you where the altar is. Actually here it's a beautiful place because all around we are surrounded by pictures of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So this space, auspiciousness, is coming to us from all directions. But let this moment when I'm sitting here, feeling their presence coming through their pictures to me from all directions, be a model of my life also. Everywhere there is their invisible presence manipulating life to come to me with auspiciousness and auspiciousness alone. Sometimes the moment comes as a difficulty, as a pain given to me by human imperfection. But that also has a secret gift. The secret gift is the opportunity to grow in dealing with that imperfection. So that difficult moment is also auspicious. That moment where I feel lost because there's no control is also auspicious, because it's taking me to a point where I let go of control and surrender. So as we chant this mantra, very good to actually bring to mind something you find inauspicious or unfortunate in your life, and invite the Bhadra, the auspicious, to show itself to you even in this appearance of a Bhadra in auspiciousness. Anubhadra Kritvo yantu vishvata. Everyone. Anubhadra Kritvo yantu vishvata. Anubhadra Kritvo yantu vishvata. Anubhadra Kritvo yantu vishvata. Anubhadra Kritvo yantu vishvata. Last time. Anubhadra Kritvo yantu vishvata. And just silently in your heart, Anubhadra Kritvo yantu vishvata. May noble thoughts come to me from everywhere. May everything I perceive be perceived through the filter or lens of nobility, auspiciousness, Bhadra. May I see everything as a habitation of God, molded by God, and so auspicious, so good. Hands together in a namaste. Let's end with 3 Oms.